Dana, so nice to have you again on my podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. I loved our last talk and look forward to this talk as well.
Me too, me too. Well, your new book is coming out, and it's really a beautiful, beautifully written book. And it's not the first one. You said it's 14 books that you have been writing. So tell me, what was it actually that made you go into writing in the first place?
Mm. Well, I'm going to be 70 next year, and I can say with confidence I've been writing for more than 6 decades. And it's kind of scary to even think of that number personally. But so I started writing about the age of 10, maybe earlier, writing letters to my parents when I was away at camp. But I really started writing at the age of 10 when my grandmother and caretaker took her life in our home. My parents were immigrants from Europe. We lived in New York, and she was looking after me. And I had knocked on her door one morning and said, I was asking her if I could go play at a friend's house, and she didn't answer. And that started the whole saga of her passing. She took an overdose of sleeping pills. And my mother, this was the 60s, my mother really didn't know how to handle it. So she was an English major in her university studies, and she went out and bought me a Cahill Gibran journal. And she said, I'm having my own challenges. Why don't you write what you're feeling? Write letters to grandma, do what feels right. So I spent endless hours writing to my grandmother. And of course, back then, they didn't really talk much to children about death at all. Now everything is pretty much in the open. And so there were a lot of unanswered questions. I didn't even know what questions to ask. All I knew is that there was a big hole in my life. And so I realized at a very young age that writing makes you feel better. Writing can heal. That every time I wrote in my journal, whether it was a letter to grandma or writing about my feelings, I felt better. So I always used writing as a healing modality. When I went through a challenging adolescence, and then when I had a daughter who went through drug addiction, then when I dealt with 2 cancer diagnoses, various losses of loved ones, I always turned to writing because it made me feel better. And then I entered a point in life, I thought, I want to share this bliss with other people. And so I started writing a lot of articles on how writing heals and helping others write their stories. And so that the journey really started from me, but I'm now trying to spread the word to empower others to do their own writing.
And this is all beautifully also laid out in your new book, Hummingbird, which is a very personal book and a very, I said when we just got on, a very vulnerable book, because you definitely talk about these experiences that, your audience didn't know about before. But what I'm wondering, when you say healing, writing is healing, some people would say, well, if there are so many unanswered questions and you write them down, don't they just stare at you? And doesn't it feel even worse afterwards? Because there is no voice. And I think with your mother, especially, who didn't really take care of yourself, and the caretaker was your grandmother, and then you lose her, and you probably were 10 years old and wanted answers. And did the writing give you answers, or did it just give you the feeling of getting the answers out of your mind and onto the paper?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at the time it was more cathartic than anything. It was sometimes just getting it out and expressing myself made me feel good. Later on in life, when I went for my MFA in writing, I actually wrote a memoir called Regina's Closet, which was a study of why my grandmother would have taken her life. So that's what I really investigated and looked for answers. But I think when you're 10 years old, it's kind of hard I didn't really have the emotional or educational tools to figure out why I was hurting and why she would have taken her life. It was too much for me to fathom. But later on, as the years went on, as I was journaling, I realized, really she did take her life because she had a childhood trauma. She was orphaned in World War I at the age of 11. And, now there's so much work on generational trauma. And I do address that in my book as well. And so I'm probably carrying some of her trauma in my own genetics. And these are all new studies that are now coming out, which as I mentioned, I do talk about a little bit in the book. So I did find answers in the sense that, why was I feeling my own angst? I had a really good life. I had wonderful parents. They were immigrants, not home very much, but I felt angst. And so part of it, I feel like it was connected to my
Mm.
ancestral lines.
I mean, your grandmother actually wrote about her experiences. So you knew only because she also was a writer and she also journaled. And I mean, in your book, you have actually some excerpts in there where she was looking for her mother in that place where all these cholera ill people were pretty much dying overnight, one after another, and she lost her mother and grandfather at the same time, or very close to each other, and then she had to basically be raised, or they raised each other, the sisters, and the brothers left. So it's really an unbelievable story of hardship and then having to have the resilience to keep on going. And do you also feel like writing was for your grandmother a healing tool?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Like you mentioned, I did find her journal after she died. I found it in her closet. It was typed on a Remington typewriter, and I have one also. And she wrote about her experiences being an orphan in World War I, and parents having cholera and having to go to the infirmary to actually identify them. So that was a terrifying experience. Imagine the trauma that she lived with after that and beyond, and then had an abusive husband, etc. So yes, it was a very traumatic life, and I think for sure, although she never told me because I was so young, I'm sure writing helped her heal. And plus, I think she had a sense of passing on legacies. I think she knew that
Hmm.
that she would pass it, that I would receive it. She
Well,
taught me how to type, sorry.
yeah, exactly, with the same typewriter or with such a old typewriter. But you
Yeah.
also said that there is a parallel between what she went through and COVID. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it was very interesting because I started writing Hummingbird during COVID, and I started thinking about my grandmother going through the cholera epidemic. Of course, it was way before the internet. It was way before, newspapers, and, it was the early 1900s. And so how people found out that there was an epidemic was that they were dying on the streets, or people were knocking on doors saying, don't drink the water, or whatever they were saying. So I realized that the communication we have now is so different, and we're so blessed, to have that. Sometimes we get too much information, but I think it's, we have a much richer world in that sense. We're so informed. So I did think of her a lot during the pandemic, and how lucky we are to have medications now. Back then, people were just dying
Yeah,
and not informed.
yeah, but certainly
No
a lot of
immunizations either.
people.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what was similar maybe is that tremendous loss that so many people had endured during COVID and that time, and also that sense of helplessness. And I think that is where your, suggestions about journaling can be so powerful, because it does get you out of this helplessness, because there is at least something you feel you can do, something you feel like you can be creative or proactive in. And I often talk with people that go through trauma or just are dealing with a terrible diagnosis, and journaling is certainly something that comes up. But the question that often they are facing is, how do I start? I'm not even a writer. I don't even know anything about writing. And what if, I just don't know how to even put anything on the paper? So what would you suggest? How do people start journaling as a healing tool?
Yes, there's different ways. It really depends on the individual person. Sometimes there are online courses. Some people like the sense of community and journaling with others. Other people will read books, like my book, Writing for Bliss, gives a whole bunch of writing prompts to give you ideas on what to write about. And the other thing is, if you just want to just pick up I think one of the tricks is picking up a journal that resonates with you, whether, it should open flat and it should be comfortable. You should like the cover, and, get a pen that feels comfortable. You should feel motivated to want to write. And then I would say, as a general rule, to journal every day, 15, 20 minutes, preferably at a time when you're not disturbed. Uh, I'm a big believer in rituals. And so I always tell my students to try to have a ritual before you write, whether it's lighting a candle, having a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, meditating, whatever feels right for you. And just sit down and just write. You can start out as simple as right now I'm feeling like, and you could start writing about I'm feeling happy. But then, it's kind of stream of consciousness running. You don't know where it's going. You might end up talking about a sister that you hadn't seen in a long time, or you might talking about a lover that you miss, or so there's no beginning, middle, and end with journaling. It's just kind of free flowing. So I would just suggest just write and let your subconscious speak. Don't let your editing mind in too much, because we're very hard on ourselves sometimes when it comes to editing. And grammar and spelling doesn't matter in journaling.
But it is supposed to be done with a pen, not typewriter or computer.
Well, I just taught a course at the library here in California this week, and we talked about that a bit. And I think it's really personal preference. I mean, they have done studies that you're much more creative when you have a pen in hand and you're writing as opposed to on the computer. But there are people that don't like their handwriting and it stresses them out to write. So I say, whatever way you can get your words or feelings on a page, whatever works for you is good. But if you have the choice, I would definitely say pen and paper. Someone was asking me, she says, I love writing with pencil. Is that okay? And I'm not a big advocate of pencil because the tendency is to erase. And I think your first instinct that you write down is probably the most, genuine one. So, but,
Mm.
you know, I try to make not too many rules with journaling because otherwise it becomes like too academic.
And does anyone benefit from journaling? Do you have the feeling this is only a specific creative type, or would you say anyone, just like anyone can benefit from meditating? Journaling can also be a form of that contemplation for all walks of life.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know there are some people that are better speaking than writing. So sometimes I would say you can dictate into your phone or dictate your
Mm.
feelings and then have it transcribed. There are people that prefer talking. I mean, I think as a writer, I prefer writing. So that's me personally. But if you feel like your comfort zone is more speaking, then you can, as long as you get the feelings out, I think that's the most important thing, not to keep them bottled up.
And when do you know when to stop? I mean, time 15 minutes could be an easy hint, but is there a feeling that happens after the writing that says, okay, I did it. Now I'm done with it?
That's a great question. Well, everyone's different. I mean, I say start with 15 to 20 minutes. You might end up journaling for an hour. I would say just feel when people usually feel when they're done. If you start writing and you realize you're starting to feel internal pain and frustration and anger, then I always suggest stopping and giving yourself a break and coming back to that thought, because the idea is to have some emotional release, not to get, the idea is not to get stressed out. So if you're feeling stressed, then you probably should stop and do something else.
But it's okay to cry, or it's okay to write down anger or things that really are maybe, intense emotions, but writing about them is not prohibited, obviously, even though they may feel a little stressful in the moment, but certainly something that can also serve as a release.
Exactly. Yeah. Anything you feel like writing. And some people like doodling, while they're writing, just to kind of get their thoughts together or distract them. And so that's fine too. And sometimes I suggest to people, if they really are having trouble, just make a list. Like, what am I thankful for? Who am I thankful for? What memories would I want to keep in a memory box if I had the choice, those kinds of things. And then when you start making a list of things, and then you can kind of circle the ones that are resonating with you and then write more in detail. Other people like writing poems. Poems are short, succinct ways to express your feelings, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
And if you're having trouble, I always suggest reading. You can't really be a writer unless you read a lot. So I suggest reading people that inspire you, and then you might be inspired to write your own work.
Hmm. And do you feel like, I mean, you had certainly a lot of challenges that you faced in your life, and starting with when you were 10 years old and you started writing. But if you're really facing something difficult, like a cancer diagnosis, what would you say then is the best writing prompt? Just to the feelings, or does it need to be a healing idea or belief or a future projection, or what did he help you when you were dealing with all of those problems that came your way?
Yeah, again, everyone's different. For me, I just would write in the morning and say, I would do gratitude journaling, what I'm thankful for. I'm waking up today. Yes, I have cancer, but I have a roof over my head. I have a husband. I have children. I have grandchildren. I'm not, I'm blessed. I have blessings. There are things that are not great. And so you can write about the good and the bad. And you can also talk about, where did you can sort of hypothesize too, where did I get this cancer? Is there a reason why I might have it? If you believe in body, mind, spirit, maybe you can hypothesize, have I had stress? How am I do I like the doctor that I have? It's kind of like Anna East Nin said, her journal was her best friend and her confidant. And so, because the journal doesn't judge us, and it doesn't talk back. So there's that blessing also.
But doesn't it talk back sometimes? Because I know from journaling that sometimes there are different voices that we can journal from. Just like as we're tapping into the subconscious, there are different voices that are at work. Some may feel like the voice that has been victimized, and then there may all of a sudden come a voice that feels like, more encouraging, or one feels like a child, one feels more like an adult. I mean, do you ever notice that different messengers come through?
That's an interesting. I never thought about that, but I suppose when I'm hurting, I guess my child voice comes in. Because that's a little girl in me that's hurt, that somebody hurt me, somebody said something, somebody did something that bothered me. So it's true, the child voice does come in, and then you have the adult voice that responds. And that's actually another really good way to journal is, right now I'm feeling hurt. My best friend said something that bothered me, and then responding with the adult voice, like trying to be detached from the actual experience. It would
Hmm.
be an interesting exercise. I've not really tried that personally.
I know someone tried, and I could never do it because my handwriting is already bad enough. But basically, she said, I'm writing with my left hand, the child voice, and the right hand, the adult voice. And she was right handed. And it really worked for her. It was literally feeling like channeling different sources inside of her. And it was a beautiful conversation that, yeah, gave her new insights that she never would have had in her head. Because writing slows you down too. It's not like the thoughts that are bouncing back and forth. And so that may be
Mhm.
something too to
Yeah,
consider.
I like that. I like that idea. I also can't write at all with my left hand, so I struggle with that, but I like the idea of that. The other thing is if you're having problems with a particular person, you might want to have a picture of them on your desk, or someone that you miss, or a beloved that you're sad about. So anything that would jog memory, I think is a good thing. Artifacts of a person, like when I was writing Regina's Closet, I had a bottle of perfume of my grandmother's, and so whenever I smelled it, it generated memories of her. So any memory generators are good, because we don't always write about the present. And that's the other thing. We could be writing about the present, but are always triggered to connect the present to the past. There's something, it seems to be there's always something that happens in our life that reminds us of the past. And so memory triggers are really great too. Or eating a food.
I mean, this writing about the past or your life. I mean, I think everyone should do it. I remember that my one of my last conversations with my mother was about her life, and I wish I would have recorded it because she gave me all these insights about, the people that were significant and the challenges, and yeah, that was something that I wish she would have written down. But Is it something that has a specific benefit to writing about one's life? It doesn't have to be a published piece, but just writing and summarizing or going back. And do you feel like that helps us to make more sense of our current life, or it helps us just to put things into perspective? And what did you notice?
Yeah, it definitely helps us put things in perspective. And it also helps us, because it was someone says, Soren Kierkegaard, that life is lived forward, but examined backwards. I mean, I think the only way we can examine our life is to look back on it and reflect on it, which is very often why I say most of my memoir students are, I would say, 40 and over, because it's the idea of the memoir is to not necessarily write about what happened to you, but how did that experience that you went through affect who you became? And so you can't really write a memoir when you're too young, because you don't have that distance from the experience that you want to understand.
Right.
Uh, so there's definitely, in answer to your question, there's definitely a benefit in studying and figuring out how our experiences turned us into who we are. And I mean, we know stories of siblings living in the same household, going through the same experience, whether it's trauma or not. And, they come out completely different. So what is it? Is it their personality? Is it like, what is it that is different? So it's good to reflect on that, but
No,
not
it's
to get
also
bogged down.
interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just saying not to get bogged down.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the siblings also have completely different recollections about what happened when you ask them. The one felt really like, oh my God, this was the end of the world. And the other, oh, it was parents fighting, no big deal. So there's definitely also a personality difference right from the start. But I'm wondering, like, when you look back into your biographies, why did you write Hummingbird? This is not, what did you actually, kind of inspired you or got you to do that?
Well, I think getting a little bit bored in the pandemic. I think for one,
Mhm.
I was in my office a lot, and I had red flowers outside my office, and there was a hummingbird that visited every morning, and very religiously would kind of, I felt like was looking at me and giving me messages. And I've always had a picture of my grandmother, my mentor, on my desk. And for some reason, something hit me one day where I thought, I wonder if that's grandma visiting. And then I started studying hummingbirds, and I learned that they really do have a connection to the heavens, and they are often messengers. So that's when I started studying the whole idea, when I decided to write the book and about my experience and my connection with my grandmother, my connection with ancestors. I also had, after my father passed, doves would come to my window all the time. And so
Mm.
whenever I see a dove, I think of him. So I think I was inspired to study my ancestors during the pandemic, but I also want to make it really clear that ancestors don't have to be blood related. Native Americans believe that ancestors can be placed, ancestors can be mentors. And I'm a believer in that too. I live in California. I love Big Sur. When I go there, I feel like it's my ancestors are all there. I feel, and in Hawaii too, I feel the same. So I think ancestors don't necessarily have to be blood relations, but it's anything that really has inspired you or made you who you are and affected you and given. So I've gotten messages from all those modalities, but during the pandemic, it was mainly my grandmother who was visiting me.
And what do
I'm
you
sure
think she said? What was the message?
she was telling me over and over, because I do have bone marrow cancer. I've had it for 17 years and I've not done treatment. I've done alternative modalities. Of course, the Western doctors want to do treatment, but I have no symptoms. It's just I have funky blood work, and I'm refusing treatment. I'm doing meditations, eating well, etc. And she was basically telling me, and I was asking her as she was here, what do I do? Because, I'm a little concerned. And she said, like I've always told you, follow your heart. Just continue to follow your heart. Listen to your heart. Your heart knows. And so that was one of the most important messages. And then the other message was follow your passions. She said, you know that you love to write, so continue. Don't ever stop doing that. Life is too
Mhm.
short. She was telling me life is too short.
Well, and you also said that you looked into the eyes of the photographer, the photo of her on the desk, and there was really like a connection you felt in that moment, almost like you could, get the messages not only through the hummingbird, or also through that. Is that still happening?
It still happens. Yeah. I think she was very intuitive in her eyes. I once saw a very well-known intuitive, and she told me that my grandmother was a seer, which is what they called it back then. And she did see things that most people didn't see, which is another reason why that I feel really connected to her, because I got messages that no one else was ever able to relate to me. So yeah, I do. I just moved, so she's not on my desk right now. But oh yeah, she's on my shelf. I do have her. Yeah.
Oh, you want
She's
to get
always
her?
yeah, she's always it's a very big picture. She's always here.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, that's the problem with the
the
blurred
light.
background
It's hard
because
to
I
see.
think you have to
Oh,
have it.
it's because of me
Yes, I think you
blocking
have to have it in front of your face in order for that to work. I don't know exactly, or you have to turn the
see.
blurred
Let me
background out.
see what I should do. I'll figure this out. I'm obviously not too savvy. How do I stop this blur?
Good question.
Uh,
Ah, here we
Sorry.
go. Yes. Oh,
I have a very bright
she
window, so it's
was
hard to see. But
gorgeous.
she was a model in Vienna, so she had a pretty intense glare.
I love also that smile. She has this little tiny hint of a
Smirk, right?
smile.
Like yeah,
Wow.
she definitely saw things that no one else saw. There's no doubt about it.
I mean, you write about intuition, and that's something that maybe you have inherited from her, this ability to see. But do you feel like that writing can also sharpen our intuition?
Oh, definitely, because it can, it could help us get in touch with our unconscious mind, especially if we do stream of consciousness writing. And this teacher I met recently says now they call it quick writing in school, which means, writing without taking your pen off the page for 15 or 20 minutes. And we used to call it automatic writing, stream of consciousness.
Hmm.
Now it's quick
Hmm.
writing. So yes, I do believe that I had a lot of surprising things come to me through writing that I was in shock about.
Like what?
Like, I like when I would start writing about, I was upset about something, but really realized the core of why I was upset was something else.
That's always fun when you kind of really see this is only a symptom and the real issue is something deeper.
Like when you're mad at someone for doing something and you're like, wait, I really wasn't mad at them. I was mad at something inside me that reacted to them. And again, that's the most important thing about writing is it's not so much about your experiences but how you reacted to your experiences. And that's what I encourage my students to write about uh, when they go through cancer, when they go through trauma, whatever. Like how has it affected you? How do you feel it in your body? Where do you feel it?
Hmm.
What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it look like?
So, did you also get more insight about your own cancer diagnosis, what the cancer is actually about, what the messages are, where the root cause sits?
I'm investigating that now with a naturopath. And so my mother's 93. She's still alive, but God bless her. When I was a kid, she used to put mothballs in the closet to save our wool sweaters. And there's been studies saying that bone cancer can be a result of that benzene, which is a very harmful chemical. Now, I don't know, it's
Mhm.
all speculative. Uh, but I also believe the mind-body connection, the stresses that we go through in life.
Yes.
I think I'm sure you've heard that we all have cancer in us. It's a matter of when and if it's going to grow.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely believe that there are certain kind of either traumatic events or conflicts inside of us that weaken our immune system and can manifest themselves and also in cancer. And That has been also more and more studied. But it's interesting because I think it can be a path of healing as well when we are uncovering it through writing and just become more aware of what maybe the message of the cancer is. Just we talked about, there is a voice of the child. Isn't there also a voice of the illness? And could
Mhm.
this illness also communicate with us more what its needs or its messages are all about?
Exactly. And I tried doing also some creative visualization, which is really interesting too. And I had this visual of, you know, a broom coming through my bones and just sweeping away the cancers. And, I'm a believer in all that. Who knows? I think whatever makes us feel like we're staying healthy, you know. But
I
writing,
know that it works because it worked for a relative of mine who had breast cancer and did visualization. And before she had surgery, she didn't have to have chemo, so she was just planned for surgery. She had been able to reduce the cancer by 50% through the visualization of little fishies coming in and eating it away. I mean, she read Bernie Siegel's book, and it's definitely something that I think is, yeah, we have to also sometimes take use of what is, available to us. We just lose too quickly, believe in ourselves, and defer too quickly to others. And I think that is also what writing can do for you. It can bring you back to your own voice and to your own wisdom and your own insights and see
Mhm.
where it leads you.
Yeah, exactly. And I also tell people to write letters in their journals too, because sometimes it's easier to write letters to people than it is to talk to them. So if you're having a relationship problem, or you can even write a letter to your cancer. Hey, cancer,
Right.
hey, trauma, like what's going on? Why, I think letters, for some reason, that dear, some reason it lets us release a lot easier. I'm not sure what the mechanics of that is, but that's something else I often suggest.
And do you read journals regularly again, or is it once it's done, you move on?
I don't read them again. I do have boxes and boxes in my garage of journals. And sometimes, on rare occasions, I'm really stuck. I will go and just pull one out and go, oh, that was an article I never wrote. I do teach in my journaling workshops that when they finish a journal, they to highlight what still resonates with you on the subjects that you're writing about. And then if you want to dig deeper into those subjects, that would be an idea.
But in general, you write it and you're not going a week later back and say, oh my God, what was I thinking? So you just move on.
I just move on, but I do. One thing I should say, it's very important to date your journals, because if you
Uh,
do decide to go back and you're like, wow, I can't believe I felt that way about that in situation, it's very helpful.
some people are afraid that their journals will be read, and that's why they don't want to journal. How do you handle that?
I just tell people have no fear. I mean, we cannot live our life in fear. And, I also say that, what are you afraid of? The stories over time have not changed. There's been love, there's been war, there's been trauma, there's been, all the emotions have been going on since the beginning of time. So your story is unique to you, but it's not, it's if you're going to hurt someone, well, and maybe you're speaking the truth, maybe they need to hear it.
And would you tell the people around you, don't touch my journal, or there are no real rules, or is there a little sticker on it only for me to use?
Yeah, it's a personal thing. I had a friend, he died, and he was a big journal keeper, and he told his family, please burn these as soon as I die.
And they
So
respected it?
I believe they respected it. And that's fine too. That was his choice. But I don't think, for the most part, the family is going to spend time to read journals, especially like if you've been journaling your whole life. That's a lot of reading.
Well, you read your grandma's journal,
I
so
did, but it was not long. It was, 50 type pages.
okay.
So it wasn't. And she wrote that what's the word? Like after it happened. She wrote it
Hmm.
after she immigrated. So it
I
wasn't like
see.
writing in the present. Um, but yeah, I mean, to read, because I would say 5%, 95% of what we write in journals is probably not useful moving forward.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing about reading it because I think it can also, feel sometimes, oh no, I understand this person better, but it can also create the opposite. I know a friend of mine read the journals of her mother, and she was really shocked how sometimes her mother was so negative and judgmental of her, and so it kind of even after her passing made her be a little bit upset. And then there were other things where she felt like she understands better why she had certain idiosyncrasies. But in the end, I do agree with you or with this friend of yours. It's probably better just to let them be
Yeah.
burned and let them be personal because it is a personal story and not anyone else's business.
But it's also, we can also think of it as a gift. You know, in my grandmother's journal, she did mention that she was separated from my grandpa and they were living in the same house. And that was a shock. They're actually divorced and living in the same house. And I was like, wow. Because that was the house that my parents had. So I
Hmm.
thought it was interesting for me. It wasn't painful. It was just like, wow, why did they do that? So I started examining that. I think leaving journals is a gift. I don't know. I don't know what my kids are going to do. I have three kids. I have no idea.
I can imagine that.
I haven't even thought about it. I guess I should. You're reminding me to think about this now.
But that's also a question I had about ancestors because so many people don't really have any curiosity or any kind of, maybe even respect for their ancestors. Yeah, well, there was a grandma. I remember a little bit something. What do you think is so? I mean, let's say the lineage first. Why is it so helpful and important to really have a closer look at the ancestors and understand better what they did and maybe what they had learned in their life so that we can learn from those learnings?
Well, that's just exactly it. I think that there's a lot of wisdoms that we're missing out on if we don't connect with them. And so I know a lot of the millennials really don't care about a lot of the ancestors and the traditions. And there's just, for some reason, they want to be independent. They want to break free of all that. For me, I find it a treasure. It's a real treasure knowing and learning whether I probably lead a totally different life than my ancestors, but it's just fascinating to me because I'm a storyteller, and there's always going to be something to learn. Like, what characteristic do I have of my great grandfather that I'm carrying forth in this generation? To me, that's interesting
Yeah.
to approach it with a sense of curiosity. And I think curiosity is dying down a little bit, I'm feeling in a lot of levels.
Well, I completely agree. And I had a neighbor telling me that, after 35 years working in the school system, she basically had her last day and she was a little in tears because she said none of her younger colleagues asked her any questions about what she had learned or found out or worked for her in those 35 years. So she said, all the mistakes that I made, they have to make again. And it's I don't know what it is that we just feel like this is before the technology age, and that's why these people didn't know what they are talking about, or why we just feel like we have to do it our own. But it's certainly a harder path if we are not looking at the people that already have gone the path before us and maybe just avoiding certain traps or following certain trajectories.
Yes, I'm sad for her too, because there would have been a lot to learn about, the successes and failures and obstacles. Those are all I mean, why do we read? I mean, we read to hear other people's stories so that we know how to lead our lives and how to navigate certain challenges. I mean, I believe that's why we read, and the curiosity. So, I mean, that's why I became a writer and started sharing my work outside of the journal, because I want to help other people on their journey navigating whatever they're going through, and advocating journaling or advocating self-care, whatever it might be. But yeah, so it's sad to me. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
trying to have hope in the future generation, but there are days like, oh.
But what would you say, like, is the reader, or who is the person who should read your book, The Hummingbird?
Yeah, well, I think it's adults 18 and over, I would say. I mean, I think my grandchildren are little, I'm sure they'll read it one day, but I think I do talk a little bit, fair amount about generational trauma. So I think the younger, very young, probably won't really understand that. And so I would say adults, it's an adult book, 18 and over, I would say.
What can they expect to gain from it? So if they would say, okay, this is not about hummingbirds, apparently, so I'm reading it because now I'm curious. I like Diana. So what can I get out of the book? What do you think will be inspirational for them or useful? Because you have always these prompts, which I love, after each chapter on how to actually also use your own writing or how to use what they read in their own writing. What would you say is probably the thing that you would say is a take home message or one of the take home messages from your book?
I guess the take home messages would be that you can connect with your ancestors and learn something. And yes, the prompts at the end of each chapter also help you connect in ways that maybe you never thought of connecting, and could give you answers that you never, answers to questions maybe that you never posed. And so it's the opportunity to grow. It's the opportunity to transform. It's the opportunity to empower yourself as a human being, because we're all here for a short time.
Yeah, and I
Make the most
personally
of it.
find it a very healing book because it does
Oh,
speak a lot about, the traumas and challenges and losses, but there is always that positivity, that optimism, and that really strong belief in the good that comes through your work. And so I think anyone who is actually facing challenges can certainly benefit from this book because you are just how you lived your life and also your grandmother. There's definitely a lot of inspiration just in that. And talking about
thank
resilience, that is definitely your middle name.
Gotta be. Yeah, gotta be. It's for sure.
So, how do
Yeah.
people find the book and where can they find out more about you? And because you do offer also writing classes and courses and have 13
Mhm.
other books. So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, my website is dianaraab.com, DIANARAAB.com. And so my website has all the articles I've written and also where I'm holding upcoming events. The book will be released on January 15th, but is available for pre-order now. And through the publisher, which is modernhistorypress.com. So it's available for pre-order, and it will be available on Amazon on January 15th. And so if anyone wants an autographed copy, they can email me and I can send them a book plate, once they purchase the book. And that's basically it. All the information about me is on my website, and I'm available to travel to give workshops and inspirational lectures if anyone has a desire to have a speaker.
Well, thank you so much, Diana. I'm really happy that we talked again, and I certainly highly recommend this book. I don't know, there are some books you just start reading and you cannot stop because it pulls you in, the story and the way you describe, the real interesting settings and changes in your life and the ups and downs. And you always pull the reader back in by asking them, so how does this, reflect to your life? And what can you also maybe write about when it comes to your challenges? So we always have this opportunity as readers to also take in what you said and not just dissociate from it, but also then reflect on our own existence and see that there are certain things that we probably haven't worked through or need to reflect on. So I think it's a healing book, and I appreciate so much that you wrote it.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. And I really appreciate you having me on your program. I just love your program and all the work you're doing also.
Thank you. Well,
Thank you.
until the next book.
Okay, happy holidays.
Thank you. Take care. Hi, Dr. Friedemann here. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. If you're interested in learning more about fear and anxiety, Here you'll find guided meditations, webinars, and interviews with some of the most renowned experts in the field of empowerment. Delve into the over 230 videos and more to come every week.